Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming to the Understanding Racial Injustice speaker series presented by We Charity MN and Sari Youth Group of the India Association of Minnesota. My name is Subarna Nalamali, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Taking into consideration recent events, as allies, our organizations believe it is important to educate our local community members about racial injustices amongst the Black and African American communities. The SARI Youth Group, which stands for South Asians Against Racial Injustice, was created to find ways to engage our community to inform, educate, engage, and advocate for social and racial change in our society by leveraging the IAM platform. Our purpose with this series of events is to educate ourselves on topics such as the civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, systemic and institutional racism, and ultimately how to become an effective ally for all Black lives. This is the third event of our four-part speaker series, and our topic today will be the similarities between systemic racism in the United States and casteism in India. We understand that this week's topic may be more uncomfortable than usual. For some of us, it may be like looking in the mirror. However, we feel that drawing parallels and analyzing systemic discrimination makes it all more possible for us to work past it. Casteism may seem like a thing of the past, but for many in the South Asian community, it is something that is a rigid part of our society. Like many societies of the world, our community is riddled with a history of systemic oppression. It is essential that we address it in our journey to become effective allies. We understand that most of us are at different points of our journey in anti-racism, but we hope that this event will allow everyone to take a moment to self-examine their biases, as well as become better allies and work against racism in our own communities. Our guest speakers tonight are Neeraj Rajashekar and Dr. Suraj Youngday. If you would like to ask a question to either speaker for the question answer session at the end, please do so by using the link in the chat. Without further ado, let us get into our first presentation. Our first speaker is Mr. Rajashekar. Mr. Rajashekar is a lifelong Minnesotan and a sixth-year PhD candidate in the UMN Sociology Department. His research and teaching focus on race, diversity discourse, and political culture in the United States. His dissertation uses a combination of statistics and textual analysis to study diversity in political news media. Neeraj credits interest in studying diversity to his mother, Nirmala Rajashekar, and her music. Let's welcome Neeraj Rajashekar.
Hi, Suvarna, and hello, everybody. Thank you very much for that welcome. Akshay, let me know when you're ready with those slides. First, before I start, I just want to say I'm very heartened by this series. I think when I was doing my undergraduate in sociology, I don't know if this much popularity existed and this much attention existed to how social science can teach us about the world. And so props to you guys for organizing this series, and I'm very proud to be and happy to be involved. So today, I want to talk about some basic sociological concepts, which I think help illustrate some of the parallels between race, caste, and other identities of oppression in India, the United States, and around the world. Specifically, the topic I'd like to talk about is the concept of the social construction and the social construction of race. Next slide, please. Thank you. This quote at the top by William Isaac and Dorothy Swaine Thomas, a sociological couple of researchers back in the 1920s. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. I'd say that the concept of the social construction, not just in sociology, but the fields of social science as a whole, is an important one to fully understand and contextualize when we're talking about how systems of inequality are perpetuated and maintained. I hope I'm not bursting anyone's bubble here, but Santa Claus isn't real. Santa Claus is one example of what sociologists would consider a social construction. Santa Claus is an imaginary concept, yet the existence of this imaginary concept still has direct cultural, institutional, and material impacts upon our lives. If we define the situation as real, the consequence is still real. And though Santa Claus might not exist, every December, a certain amount of impersonators will buy a certain amount of red coats, and that will factor into our economy. Children believing Santa Claus is real shapes the conversations and discourses that we have in our society. All in all, even though Santa Claus is purely a figment of our imagination, It has a lot of cultural, material, and institutional significance. Another social construction, which has a lot more of an impact on all of our lives, is the concept of money or currency. Ultimately, money is worth much more than the material it's printed on. We agree as a society that a dollar is worth something, that we can exchange dollars and $10 bills and $20 bills and $100 bills in a system which we all agree upon. However, if we tried using rupees in America, that social construction doesn't fly when the previous social construction of the dollar exists. So, while I think sometimes people are under the impression that most social constructions act like Santa Claus and don't have many impacts on our lives, many social constructions act like money, one of the most defining and controlling aspects of social existence. Social constructions ultimately work like road signs. They give you guidelines and ways to move forward, thinking through what you're seeing, and they help you put yourself on the path and know how to operate when you're confronted with certain kinds of information. Next slide, please. The concept of the social construction applies to very many things within the social sciences. Race is an example of a social construction. Here I have, I'd say, the tip of the iceberg of some authors, primarily in sociology, who discuss how race is socially constructed. No one will deny that people of different ethnic, national, and racial backgrounds have different physical characteristics. However, how we understand what counts as white, what counts as black, what counts as Desi, what counts as Arab, Latino, etc., these are rules which are socially taught. You are taught to recognize certain features within the category of black. And what that means, what you associate with the category of black, is a socially constructed process. Race was socially constructed over 200 to 300 years of European centric colonialism. And I believe that even to this day, very many K through 12 textbooks, very many college classes assume that race has a biological grounding. Now, let me repeat myself. We have physically different characteristics, but race is like a pair of glasses, a microscope, if you will, a lens through which we see these physical characteristics and associate them with certain racial categories. And from there, the systems of racial inequality and hierarchy, counter challenges of social movements and racial identity, these all stem from a centuries old social construction. In the interest of time, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so we'll probably go to the next slide. But if we come back to this later and we want to talk more about sources and the technical detail behind this, I'd be happy to do so. But the most important part of this is to understand that race is a social construction. Phenotype, nationality, our physical appearances, these things are not synonymous with race. Next slide, please. A parallel that I see between systemic racism and systemic casteism in South Asia is the idea that because we have moved beyond explicit bigotry as a society, that inequality ceases to exist. That is an untrue ideal. Many of the authors, sociologists of race, who I've listed here, wrestle with the fundamentally challenging question. Social constructions can change. And in our society, in American society, at this point in time, on this side of the 2000s, for the most part, everyone, not everyone, but most people would agree that bigotry, classical prejudice, and exclusion are wrong. Most Americans would agree that segregation is wrong. Yet, racial inequality persists. And this is the important thing about a social construction. Its consequences are real on cultural, institutional, and material facts. These different authors all touch on different ways, whether it's through wealth inequality, cumulative segregation, healthcare, and organizational processes. There are many ways where racial disadvantage accumulates and combines into the complex theories we know as systemic racism. This still persists. If you check the sources, they're all relatively recent. Racism has been outlawed by this country's legislation in the 1960s for a very long time. But that does not mean that race is no longer a relevant predictor of life chances, life hardship, and inequality. And with here, I turn it over to Dr. Youngday, who's 10 times the expert on caste that I am. But I see a similar parallel. The Indian government has outlawed, as far as I know, explicit casteism. However, that does not mean that the inequalities perpetuated by historical casteism have evaporated. And one thing that concerns me about race or caste is people who would use the idea that because the government has outlawed cultural bigotry, that institutional and material systems changed overnight. That doesn't happen. And research shows that you can outlaw the cultural bigotry and the material inequalities can be exacerbated, grow even further, especially in a world where many people use that argument as an obstruction to pursuing equity and change. So thank you for the talk. I think I'm about in 10, 15 minutes in. To me, this is the biggest parallel between race and caste, between America and India. It is true that legally, those statuses have reached protected identity, and that culturally, if you ask people on a survey, most people, I'd like to think, won't say racist or casteist things. And yet, there are many systems of inequality which are perpetuated by these historical products. We cannot ignore these systems simply because people today believe that racism or casteism is over. Thank you for your time. That's my last slide.
Thank you so much for that educational presentation, Mr. Rajasekar. If you have any questions, there is a link in the chat, so please fill out that survey. Our next esteemed guest speaker is Dr. Suraj Youngday. He is an award-winning scholar and activist for anti-casteism and anti-racism from India. He is an author of bestseller Caste Matters. He is an inaugural postdoctoral fellow at the Initiative for Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability at the Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center. He is also a passionate human rights attorney by qualification from India and UK and a syndicated columnist. Let's welcome Dr. Suraj Youngday. Hello, Dr. Youngday. I think you are frozen on the screen. As we wait for Dr. Youngday to rejoin the session, I would just like to point out that the IAM community platform would like to raise an opportunity to donate blood safely and save lives. And amidst the pandemic, blood supply is at a dangerously low levels, and we can make a difference by donating blood at the community blood drive at Roseville City Hall on July 26th. And to schedule a time, there's going to be a link put in the chat. So I guess as we wait for Dr. Youngday, here he is.
Sorry, hello?
Hello, yeah, we can hear you now.
I should have given disclaimer. My internet has been very unfaithful with me, so my apologies to everybody. I'm on my phone now, and I'm using the the regular network so it would work. And I'm so sorry again for dropping. First of all, thank you, Suvarna, for all the patience and for doing the follow-ups more than required for me to get here. I would also like to salute the organizers who have been so diligent in their work in the Twin City area. But also I'd like to thank Neeraj for that excellent introduction to the race and caste similarities. I would just like to add a few more slides to that. But first, whenever I think about Minnesota, I think about two people. The distinguished professor of history, Ajay Skaria, who's been a dear friend and scholar of eminence, as well as Richa Nagar. And I'm just so privileged to know them, and I think they have also joined and tuned in. I can see Ajay, more certainly his hair has turned more more white, and he looks more handsome. I would also like to give a shout out to my man Vishal Zamkar, who has joined in a PhD program in the public policy school. Probably will be the first Dalit to graduate with a PhD from that department. And all props. Now let me dive into this topic. I was thinking, how do I talk about this issue, or how do I intervene in this conversation? And then I thought about that horrible picture of George Floyd's unfortunate incident. And then I thought, if I have to place that in the caste system, how will I do it? And then I saw that there is a almost archetypal characteristic of it, and I'm taking a liberty to be a little bit provocative in the sense. It is to the person, the white police officer who was kneeling on George Floyd. George Floyd here represents the Dalit condition, the Dalit personality, the Dalit situation, who's been forced into the circumstances. The person kneeling on them could be classified as the twice born, or the Savarna militant. Most likely the people who have used weapon and the power of wealth to impose violence upon the marginalized communities in India. And that could be Brahmin or the Khatris, what we call Kshatriyas within the Vedic order of caste system, the Chatur Varna Shrama, the fourfold caste system. And then the Asian police officer, who was defensive to all the violence that was being perpetuated, is the Baniya of the Indian caste system, who witnesses atrocities, but also not only refuses or protests, but participates in sorts of refusing any kind of opposition to the caste-based violence committed upon the Dalit communities. And then Mahmoud, the store owner, another Arab American, the complexities that we add to it is an OBC of the system, the backward caste, or the Shudras or the majority club caste together in the scheme of things. And I think that's how we have to now picture the kind of caste system funneling into the India as well as American system. The American racial system is, as Neeraj was pointing out, is of course a very recent system, but also it's a system that was made to undermine the caste-based sensibilities that existed in American society. And I think to propose a radical new reform, the biologies of racialized sciences, mostly Agassiz and the likes, who were here at Harvard and of course in the major institutions in the UK, described racial dynamics of human relationships very much on a phenotypical sense, and then the purity of the quote unquote bloodline became a very central characteristics as to how you raised an American racist civilization, because the purity of blood, whatever percentage of blood you have of whatever mix of or whatever origin of your parents is how it was channeled, and it was described. But early on, the social scientists or sociologists rather, had actually intervened in this and tried to proffer a new understanding, which was known as the American caste system in the American South, and heaps of literature, especially the late 19th century and early 20th century conversations in sociology is about the American caste system. And of course, in recent debates, as we have seen, Isabel Wilkerson, her book is coming out in a few weeks. But in the recent article in New York Times Magazine, of course, she tries to contrast. And for her, race is a servant of caste. That's how I'm quoting her. And you have to really understand how that perpetuates in the normalized understanding. In my discussions with her, and we've been trying to contrast these issues with what happened to the caste-based debates or caste-based conversations that we were having in American psyche as well as American social demography. To now juxtapose that with the American incident of George Floyd, the bunya as a representation of an Asian characteristic is very much fitting into the white supremacist lens, where a certain another fake characteristics of model minority myths, as well as the idea of a successful ethnic group is then promoted at the side where you want to undermine the assertion of the formerly enslaved Black people. It is the very fear of the white mentality not to grant a status of equality to the historically oppressed people. So in order to suppress that, you have now displaced their suffering with the suffering of a certain privileged minority or immigrant groups who do not have the experiences of being the progenies of the enslaved people in this land. And then that's how we see a new characteristic of the Indian Banyanism, which is very much a Banya framework, gets replaced in today's context. And it's no accident that non-Banya castes are also becoming and happy to be the Banya caste, which want to deal with the economies of oppression, but also partake into systems that perpetuate injustices. Today's the Indian ethnic group of the all other groups in America is the highest group which gains the highest annual income in average compared to others. It's more than 6 figures, more than 100,000. And within this capital-centric meritocratic arrangement of a society, the Indian Banya sensibility of whatever caste, again, as I said, gets protected by retelling the stories of one's superiority and as well as one's inferiority. Now, you, in this context, with the Asian police officer, Tao, stood in defense of atrocities that were committed historically, but also was trying in a very metaphorical lens to place his authority in the white-black dynamics. Similarly, the Indian caste system, the Banyas, operate, and when I say Banya, in this context, I don't only mean Banya, I mean to say the caste which continue to benefit out of the oppression of the Dalit, participate into perpetuating as well as reintroducing new forms of theories that have not yet entered American academic canon. And that's why the whole racialized conversation that we have, systemic racism, systemic casteism, people like Isabel Wilkerson and myself have been arguing for long that it is American caste system. If you have to look at the physical traits, that's where race becomes an easy purchase. But if you look at the systems of oppression, it is the caste, because its very invisibility grants it a certain authority to look after the systems that continue to, again, operate not necessarily in the black and white binaries, but within the binaries of various color system. Now, what Wilkerson argues is the signal of ranking within the race. Because what we are trying to find now is not just the oppression, but also how the hierarchy is structured. And one cannot really escape the hierarchy, very much Ambedkar's call, where if you are born on a certain floor, you die in that floor. You can't have a mobility across this hierarchical building. Similarly, in the American caste system, we barely have an escapade. You can become a millionaire, you can become a billionaire, but yet the right to safety or security, if you're a person of a certain phenotype, is very slim compared to a person who might be living off the as they call the trash, yet still have a security in the society. And this is what Indian Brahminical supremacist society operates in, where a person of a dominant caste benefits out of the oppression of Dalits. If Dalits are not oppressed, the person higher on the ladder stands to lose a lot. So for them to survive in a very brutal, apathetic society, Dalits need to be raped. Dalits need to be murdered. Dalits need to be mentally tortured. So a Dalit with a certain academic ranking or with certain excellence is yet questioned, because that Dalit is a person who has taken quota, a person who has come here because of affirmative like reservation policies, and that person is undeserving. These forms of simultaneous hierarchies that exist in India's caste system ensure that the fourfold system gets justified through the scriptural sanction. And now we have people with their audacity to defend caste system by providing alternative mythical theories which do not exist, without taking into account that the existence of Dalit itself means that caste system has failed. Yet there are repeated justifications to provide. Why? Because our friends within the Brahmin or the twice born caste, the Baniyas, continue to benefit by lying to their children. And people like you, Suvarna, or many other millennials or even Gen Z kids are robbed of the true intelligence. They have been propagated, they have been injected a certain propaganda that doesn't necessarily fit you, either in American system or in India's caste system. And for us, and it is an opportunity for especially people who have an origin within the South Asian broader context, who are used to discriminate based on caste, it doesn't take much effort for you to be anti-Black, because you are used to channel your creative energies to denigrate a person from certain caste background. And I think it is here where we need to now uplift a certain voice of people, which can kind of get recognized. But not only that, it also becomes part of our camaraderie. And that itself means that we need to stand true to the values of whatever freedom and justice means. But equality has to be established by the people who are not practicing equality. And this is the people who have power. And equality is not just a legislation. Equality is all about the practice and ethic. Therefore, we need to stand true, as well as willing to stand corrected whenever we feel the need to be, whenever we are called upon. And based on our sensibilities and our vulnerabilities, we will then have a more provocative and more intelligent dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Youngday, for such an informational presentation. Nalanda West is a Seattle-based organization that brings a curated selection of teachings that speak to the shared need for global awakening and the wish to live a meaningful life. Nalanda West offers programs and events inspired by the 5 fields of knowledge originally taught at Nalanda University in India. Please consider donating to this organization, as this organization is very dear to Dr. Youngday's heart. The link can be found in the chat. Our next segment will be a panel-style question-answer session. We will be using the questions sent through the Google form link in the chat to ask the speakers. So if you have not submitted your question and you have one, please do so with the link. Now, speakers, if you could unmute yourself so we can ask the first question. This first question is directed towards both of you. Can you address casteism here in the United States? For example, there are multiple associations based on caste.
Dr. Youngday, I'm going to defer to you on this one. I'm sure you have direct empirical research, whereas I would just be citing someone else's empirical research. I think you're still muted.
Thank you. But I think, the caste organizations that operate are not really acknowledging that these are caste-based organizations, because the way they look at caste-based organizational setup is very interesting. Because our friend Kavita Pillai had done this reportage about the Nair community of Kerala. But it's been historically, various other caste groups have their own associations. But for them to look at caste is to look at Dalit as well as the binaries. Like we have a white and black binary. They don't look at themselves as someone who is perpetuating casteism. For them, the one who perpetuates casteism is the person who has taken a reservation seat, or what we call the affirmative action. Or someone who talks about caste is a casteist person. Who, for a Dalit, if a Dalit asserts himself or herself or themselves, becomes a casteist. But while you wash your hands every day to every kind of caste slur and caste jokes, and as well as caste psyche that you trail your thoughts onto, it doesn't become kind of a caste manifestation of casteism. And I think this is where we need to then, that's why I'm trying to personalize the caste experience. What I want is people across the board here, various caste people, need to understand that they are part of caste. And for them, the earlier they reckon about their own caste belonging, the sooner they will be able to tackle it. Otherwise, they will be, they will still try to have this existential question. And many times, for me, for example, I have a few Brahmin friends who are scholars, and they themselves do not want to tackle that, but they want to present themselves as someone who had grown minority in America, and for their experiences are different than. So I understand the value of you being a victim of a system, but also your existence also could mean that you are participating indirectly or directly in perpetuating casteism in the society.
Thank you for your insight, Dr. Youngday. Neeraj, would you like something to add for that, or we can move on?
I would just make it a quick point. Thank you, Dr. Youngday. It is a classic tactic of reactionary organizations to couch their goals in what we would call colorblind language in the study of race, language which purposefully avoids mentioning racial terms. And if you get accused of being racist, you say, oh, you're the racist for seeing that I'm racist. In the same way that if a Dalit person stands up to casteist oppression, they're suddenly a casteist. And in the same way that they falsely equivalate Brahmin casteism versus Dalits social movements. In this country, there's a history of falsely equating Black Lives Matter to some Nazi group. Centrist people will stand there and say, oh, I don't like those Nazi groups, but Black Lives Matter does too much. Black Lives Matter is racist because it makes me think about race. You will see this sociologically with male groups or straight groups who are homophobic or sexist, and yet when you confront them with that information, they deny it. The group called the Proud Boys in America is a white supremacist patriarchal group, but they use very careful language. They do anything they can to avoid being accused of it. And then when you accuse them of being racist, once you find that they've done something racist or they support a racist policy, they'll turn around and say, you pointing at this racist data makes you the racist. So as Dr. Youngday said, we have to be ready for these kind of discursive maneuvers and not tolerate them.
Thank you for that, Neeraj. This next question is for Neeraj. How is tribalism related to racism and casteism?
Okay, this is a trickier question. If tribalism, and people will synonymize this with terms like nationalism or ethnic pride. And I think we also have a very specific understanding of tribalism within our South Asian schema. And I'm thinking more about a general sociological understanding of tribalism. Ultimately, racism is a system which has been imposed by the outside. We didn't choose to be labeled as an Indian category. Black people didn't choose to be labeled as a category of Black. And then they definitely didn't choose all the associated characteristics that the white people who labeled them that way in the colonial era associated with the category Black. I think it's important to make these distinctions. I think there will be times where you will have ethnic or tribal cultural clashes, which should not necessarily be called racist. We use that word racism as a synonym for prejudice or intergroup tension. But I think it's more important to see racism and casteism as a social system which dominates our cultural, material, and institutional social organization, which is different, I think, than tribalism and nationalism.
Thank you for that. Our next question is for Dr. Suraj Yangde. So the question is, what is the role of primarily upper caste diaspora in challenging authority and caste system in India?
Nothing. Unfortunately, the report card that I have to bring is they've been silent participants in perpetuating casteism, with very few honorable exceptions. Well, exceptions don't at all make rule. These are like people who I can count on fingers themselves. For example, a Dalit politician is around, and if a Dalit politician, let's say, joins a right wing, now it is upon me as a Dalit to criticize the other Dalit. But at the same instance, Brahmin groups are across the board. They are in the communist movement, they are in the BJP, they are in the centrist Congress, and so forth. But other Brahmin doesn't get called out to criticize the Brahmins based on the Brahmin lineage. What that means is the dominant caste in India are invested, as I said, in maintaining the caste system because they don't know anything better. They have a very deep insecurities about their future in a state. There is no other explanation one can give for one to maintain the caste system or participate in maintenance of the caste-based violence without knowing that the person doesn't know anything better, that unless and until I become part of this and make sure the caste system is intact, my survival will be fine. And I think this is a very saddest approach that has been given. And within the caste system, it operates on anti-Dalit violence, which is very central to how we have to also understand the caste-based violence. And also the casteism amongst the dominant caste themselves. Amongst the Brahmins, we calculated around 500 and I think 55 approximately subcastes or sub-subcaste exists. So there are tensions among themselves as well. But that problem is not addressed by the Brahmins. Similarly, among Banyas and Kshatriyas, there is a huge intra-caste problem. So that means, as I said, when it comes to describing caste, we have found a scapegoat of the most vulnerable category within the caste, which is the former untouchables, but we have not addressed the demon within, where Indian matchmaking hashtag is going on the Netflix, throwing shades and all the Simran aunties and all, we can see these are basically caste agents. They want to maintain the purity, and that's why a younger generation has to be strictly controlled. And what is their role is they have normalized casteism. They have introduced new justifications for the maintenance of casteism. And because of that, what they have done is they have not opened themselves to challenging. They have not opened themselves to a free market ideology. You cannot, in India, the idea of merit is failed. There is no meritorious competition. It's the competition of the people who have so much that they don't want to even let go of the limited accounts of whatever it belongs to them. And that's why the people who are from the dominant caste seldom look upon their self-privileges. And for you, privileges doesn't only mean how much money you have in your bank account or how many acres of land you own, but also by the very virtue of your last name, what kind of access you get, what kind of clubs you join, what kind of mentorship you get. You having your relatives in a foreign country, by that very virtue, that's how various privileges operate. I wrote, of course, in my book, in the final chapter, as to how the dominant caste need to circle around this very question of identifying their own issues. And believe me, it's not only Dalits or the tribals, Adivasis, suffering because of this. It is also the dominant caste themselves, but they just don't have the language of crying in a caste lens. They cry in a very anonymous anonymous economic cry, or a cry of a market-based principle. They don't have a humanitarian caste-based experiential cry. And I think that's why what we need to do is we need to train many of these dominant caste people. I am very less worried about the elder generation, but the younger ones, to kind of shape their mind to feel their complicity in this grand scheme of things. And I think once that happens, especially addressing caste amongst, for example, Nair, and then within the Nair, then there is always this regional kind of wake up within Patels. Patels is not a homogenic category, a hell lot of heterogeneity. You can't just point out one Patel and I think that's not just economics, but also that has to do with the intra-caste divides that exist.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot of the audience is thinking of this question and wants to ask this question. So what inspired both of you to be an activist? And what are some ways that millennials and Generation Z that don't understand the caste system, and how can they actively make sure they don't support that system? And what are some ways that individuals can take a step forward to don't support the system overall?
There's a lot in that question. First, I want to say the word activist is a holy sacred word, and I do not wish to take credits from activists on the ground. But I'm a guy doing a PhD who reads books. Activists put their lives at risk. Activists risk their careers, their bodies, their health, and much more. So while I'd like to say that I'm down with the cause of activism, I think we need to realize that activism is a risk that needs to be respected, and I do not wish to claim false possession in the way that Dr. Youngday is a real activist. I'm just some guy. In terms of what inspired these attention to these questions, I think ultimately the intellectual pursuit of not just touching down on the moon, but trying to create the best civic society possible demands attention to these kind of questions, and not just caste and race, homophobia, sexual assault, class issues. All of these are intertwined problems. And I think in terms of the younger generation learning both the new systems of caste and growing up in this country doing K through 12 in this education, I remember plenty of textbooks claiming that the American Civil War was not about race or slavery. For decades, people have been writing erroneous textbooks, erecting Civil War statues after the Civil Rights Movement in an attempt to squash what the next generation will think, as Dr. Youngday said. I think the first step is to put faith in the people who are fighting these things. The first step is to not be resistant to something you're learning new just because it doesn't jive with what you learned in 6th grade. You were more likely to be wrong in 6th grade than your college professor is today. That's the first step I think people can take. Not immediately trying to anti-intellectualize activist intellectuals. That is one of the biggest obstacles to activist intellectualism.
I would also kind of take a cue from Neeraj's thought and add my 2 cents to that profound thought. I think the Gen Z. I mean, you guys can fool Trump. You guys have that power. You guys are way ahead than some of these old school types who are still hanging on to unnecessary burdens. And I think that's why the hope kind of flourishes. You guys have the capacity, and especially and we all have been seeing the Black Lives Matter protest, the multiracial, multicolor, beautiful young kids. Pardon me for using kids, but I meant in a lovable way, who were on the ground. And this was just very peaceful for my eyes to see that they are now rubbing shoulders and standing. There was one very it just struck my mind where a young gentleman of maybe, I mean, pretty much Gen Z, where he jumped over the barricade and raised his hand, and the cops started doing. Immediately, his friend, a female white person, jumped off the fence as well, and she went ahead of him. I want that to happen within the Indian caste society, where persons with dominant caste or caste privileges to be the shield. Because you bet, if the person who is a police officer is name is Mishra, and you are a Mishra, you better know he will not inflict as serious violence as he will inflict a violence on Yengde or Jamkar in this case. There is a relation to how we put ourselves into this. This is not a romantic project of getting our CVs and resumes aligned. It's about life and death, and it's about how we channel our creative energies. And I'm going back again to creative energies, because I really believe this new stream of power that has come about, and with its obvious limitations, we need to now find out that how, first of all, I as an individual have been miseducated about my position in the caste ladder. What and why did my parents hide from me? One obvious explanation is that parents didn't wanted that, caste is a dirty thing, and it's thing of the India. We don't talk about it, and but yet what, we secretly practice. We celebrate festivals. We have our own deities. We have our own relatives. Who are your relatives? Relatives, an extension of your caste people. We have funny kind of euphemisms about this caste-based practices, and then the second object would be to then find out your location in the caste system. And it's okay for you to come from a dominant caste. There's nothing you can do. But what is not okay is making peace with the fact we cannot afford to stay silent in this moments. Then what could you do as a third state is to start challenging from your house, to start making changes from your house. And if it's difficult, welcome to the life of Dalits. It has been multi-level difficulties and generational difficulties. So let's not also give up and whine about it. Oh, you know what? My mom is just a loose cannon, or my dad is a failed case. My aunt, let's not. I mean, that is a part of it, but we can do more than that. Is to then find out then your role. The fourth step is, what can you do now, having worked in your family, and that working in the family is a daily business. You have to constantly challenging, is to then subvert some of the casteist stereotypes that our parents, our families, our friends think about. And that very much applies. And of course, it's not a race caste thing. We cannot immediately, because it's of course a different phenomenon, but you can see some apparent similarities. So one of them thing is, there is always a conversation on reservation or affirmative action. There's always conversation on meritorious. There's always a conversation on Dalits being violent people, Dalits being those people who are out on the streets. Almost the way you can replace the Dalit with a black, and then you can find similarities existing about how it operates. The next step in that would be then to start making your own little groups who are actively participating in dismantling the caste structure within your circles. You need not go into the Dalit groups or Dalit organizations. As I said, caste operates in your family. There is Simran auntie in everyone's house. There is Simran auntie in your mom, Simran auntie in your dad, and Simran auntie across the board. So how do we then try to piece out the Simran aunties vibes that are existing, because they are affecting you. And that's why I want you to personalize the caste violence that have been trained, that you have been trained to follow. And again, if that means, and I always tell, if that means breaking away with your family for some years, well, sometimes you need a rehab, and probably getting out of that cesspool or the mindset is perhaps a good thing. I'm not asking you to break away from your parents, but what I'm suggesting is that there are ways you need to start. And we have observed, like at least I have observed, the younger generation, when they talk to their parents at least listen to them. Even they might disagree, but if I come and talk to Suvarna's parents, they will be obvious, yeah, he's going to say the same thing. But if Suvarna nags them to the hell, they will be like, okay, I need to now, do that. And why would you do this? You would do this because you have become, or you have trained to be the casteist robot of the system. For not, you don't have to ask question. There is a command, there is a code given to you, and you literally behave like a brainless person operating on other person's rules. So I think these are the ways, once we are able to put our love into this. And again, I'm saying, let us not think of becoming the saviors. Let us not think also of dismantling the caste system in India or in America. You have to start dismantling that within your own inner circles. For example, if you're a Nair, or if you are a Kamma, if you're a Reddy, if you're a Patel of whatever hues, and if you are, I'm just trying to find out if you're a Cheka, I'm just finding out the names here, or you're a Nayak, what you need to do is to then start making those investigations. And people will push you back by saying, why are you bringing caste here? As if as if you are an extraterrestrial alien who has bought something from a different planet. We need to start then, having this bold conversations. And why not make a children parent anti-caste dialogue, have sessions about that, where kids who are now educated, or also give them readings, or show them TV shows. And of course, we don't have enough cinemas. We don't have black like films in India where Dalit is a character or main hero. But what you could do is start have the small little meeting groups, where, like LGBT, I was on a group where the Desi LGBTIQ plus parents were talking about how they need to go beyond, and it was beautiful. Different religion people were there. Similarly, such kind of harmonious dialogue, if you are injecting, and again, people will take it as an assault on their religion or on their faith or whatever. If it is wrong, it is wrong. It has nothing to do with one's faith or one's religion or one's how they adhere to certain values. A wrong needs to be called out wrong. And if you are not willing to make peace with wrong, you will multiply the wrongs. And we can't afford multiple versions of Bible to solve one caste problem.
Thank you for that. And as Dr. Yangde and Neeraj were talking, it reminded me of a quote by Desmond Tutu. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. So speak up, educate yourself, and through these speaker series, learn something and educate other people in your inner circle, like Dr. Yangde said. So we have time for a few more questions. Our next question is directed for Dr. Suraj Yangde. In the state of Maharashtra and other parts of the country, there are 75% reservations in jobs that may seem to give Dalits an advantage. What are your thoughts on these reservations?
I mean, see, that's the thing I'm saying. This person who has asked this question, unfortunately, is ignorant and really doesn't know where the question is coming from. And I think that's why we need a lot of education. Now, whoever asked this question, I don't want to put the person on the spot, because I understand where you're coming from. And I know that's a position of love. That's why you're concerned about reservation coming to the marginalized people who have never given an opportunity ever in their life. So let me just break that for you. Reservations, 75% reservation doesn't exist in Maharashtra or elsewhere. 75% doesn't exist anywhere in India. The Supreme Court has, so the population of around 79%, which includes scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and the other backward classes, which is 79 approximately percentage, is forced to compete within 49% of reserved seats. And the person which is 19% caste, Brahmins, Banyas, and Kshatriyas, and other dominant caste who have elevated from the backward caste, backward classes who have become forward classes, they are about 19%, and they have 51% field to graze. Now you tell me who is having more and who is having less. And if you ask me, I would rather propose reservation according to your percentage. The day we will say that, Brahmins will take arms and they will fight tooth and nail, because they are 3.5 to 4%, but they control 48% of India's economy and 57% of India's bureaucracy, 77% of India's judiciary. Brahmins stand a lot to lose. Brahmins are the whites of South Africa, who are minority, but they have maintained a apartheid system. So I think we don't have statistics, and that's why we talk. And so that's why I'm sympathetic, but we don't have numbers. I have numbers that I'm giving to you. Brahmin, again, is a group that is that makes 48% more than the average national gross income of India, which is again a paper with the Paris School of Economics. Bharti and others have calculated as to how much income they own. And then when we talk about ownership of resources as well as the various bureaucratic positions, I just encourage the person to just find out, or even you can Google caste-wise representation in judiciary, caste-wise representation in bureaucracy, caste-wise representation in universities. Let me help you with the last one because the figures are on top of my head. The Dalits have approximately 18% reservation, but their representation is less than 5% in the total jobs. This is why I'm talking about the universities of various categories. Then the tribals are technically 8% position they should get, and they are less than 1% jobs who are filled. Then of course the Muslim women who of course have a minority quota, they are less than 1% again. And then when you look at the general caste or the dominant caste people, the 19%, as I've said, occupy 75.4% of India's faculty positions. 19% population occupying 75% of seats, and you still whine about reservation.
Can I add a point to that, paralleling race, while we're talking about myths that people believe, the ways that generally conservatory, reactionary folks who are opposed to equity pursuing, who are opposed, as Dr. Young said, people who are invested in the system of domination, which benefits them. They will frequently perpetuate within politics, news, misinformation, distorted facts about how equity pursuing policies such as reservations or what we call affirmative action in this country function. So while we're on there, and while I have you guys as an audience, because I studied diversity discourse, I know a bit about affirmative action in this country. And so in case you've heard things that clash about how affirmative action works, affirmative action really doesn't exist anymore. It never truly existed in this nation. During the Reagan administration, after the federal government said companies with federal contracts, so companies who are getting federal tax dollars, cannot have active discrimination. That was the first way affirmative action ever became a concept in this country, and about the last. From the 1970s to today, Republicans have mobilized anti-affirmative action sentiment and perpetuated very many myths and lies, which have led people to be under the impression that today, being a white person is a disadvantage when getting into college. And statistically, that doesn't hold up. Furthermore, in this country, there is no attention to protected classes whatsoever. They use a holistic diversity requirement to those people in the admissions offices. A wealthy Indian kid growing up in a white suburb, which probably defines most of us Indian second gens, that person is equivalent in these systems' minds to someone who's Black or Indigenous growing up in an impoverished area. So in this country, what you could consider reservations or affirmative actions is even less, barely non-existent. Yet Republicans have made a career by bringing anti-affirmative action lawsuits to the Supreme Court. And that was never about the lawsuit or the kid who didn't get into college, because by the time the lawsuit was finished, he's 28, he's older than I am. It was about mobilizing conservative voters so they stop caring about their boss controlling 99% of college seats. So they are unconcerned about wealth inequality. And as Dr. Young, they said, race and caste, race is the caste of this country. They managed to create this narrative that it is their white race which has led to disadvantages for them. These myths about reservation and affirmative action are not just misinformation, they are political tactics. And it's important to remember that.
Thank you so much for both of your insight. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. So thank you everyone for all your questions. We would like to end tonight with some thank yous and a call to action. To start, we would like to thank everyone in IAM, the SARI Youth Group, and We Charity MN to help organize this event. Next, and most importantly, we would like to thank our esteemed speakers, Neeraj Rajasekar and Dr. Suraj Youngday, for taking time out of your schedules to educate us on such a vital topic. Last but not least, we would like to thank all of you for attending this event. We really hope you were able to take something from this event. We hope that throughout this event, you were able to self-examine any biases as we become better allies and work against racism in our own communities. We will be having one more event like this on different topics, and we hope that you all can be there as well. Next week, we will be having Jal Karendi and Do speaking about allyship and how white individuals and non-Black POC can help support the BLM movement. This speaker series will take place at the same time, 7 p.m. CDT, and at the same Zoom link. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your night.